to hello to everybody who may be listening. For today's podcast, we are going to be talking about a topic that I find both fascinating and heartbreaking, and that would be the topic of femicide. So, for starters, what is femicide? Femicide, according to the Organization of Women's Aid, can be defined as the murder of women because they are women. So, what this means is that femicide is the most extreme version of gender-based violence, because these murders are done because of the sole purpose that a woman is a woman. So, this poses the topic of conversation for today, which is, should femicide be a separate category of crime similar to hate crimes? Why or why not? So before I begin to answer this question, I would like to start out by saying that everything I talk about is from doing my own research and developing an opinion of my own. So yes, as both a woman and a feminist, my answer will be unapologetically biased, but know that research has been conducted in order to back up my answer and stance on the topic. So with that disclaimer being said, my answer is yes, I absolutely do believe that femicide should be its own separate category of crime, similar to hate crimes, and we're going to spend the rest of this time, the remainder of our time together, discussing why I believe the statement to be true. So, for starters, I believe it's important to discuss the fact that there is a reason why we separate crimes into different categories. So first of all, there is the actual legal purpose that has to do with determining punishment for crimes. So for example, first or second degree murderers have different sentences for felons on trial. And these types of crimes have to be made distinct in order to determine those punishments. And aside from the legal purpose, I think that the most important reason for all of this distinction is to bring awareness. And I'm going to be talking about that a lot throughout this. So for example, if a city had a rise in crimes targeted specifically towards urban neighborhoods and all of the victims were Black, it would be a crime in itself for the justice system not to acknowledge the pattern that every victim was Black. The importance of acknowledging the pattern is to address the fact that specific groups of people are being targeted. And with that being said, if we do not acknowledge the obvious pattern, we are choosing to be ignorant. Oblivion is being aware of something that is happening. Oblivion is being unaware of something that is happening. And I don't think we can call turning a blind eye to an obvious pattern oblivion. I believe that is ignorance. So if we have separate categories for crimes that spread awareness, such as hate crimes, why would we not have one for targeted women? Hate crimes are acknowledged as their own separate entity because they happen frequently enough that their intentions became obvious. So when people started to take notice, it became its own separate category to be treated differently than any other crime, as it should be. So why should that same concept not be applied to crimes targeted towards women? So in my opinion, the answer to this question should be obvious to anyone, that of course crime targeted towards women should be defined as such. So why would others disagree? Feminists and me have to state the obvious that this type of crime flies under the radar because it is in fact women that we are talking about. And you know, in a patriarchal society that we have built, it is inherent that the justice system would not be quick to address the issue of femicide. I mean, I hate to say it, but haven't we seen a pattern throughout history of women seeking justice for women being twisted into a negative connotation? I mean, it seems that throughout history, women simply demanding justice have had their opinions manipulated by their opposers into some sort of political statement. And truthfully, I do not think that there's anything political about asking for the acknowledgement of the obvious target of people who murder women simply because of their gender. And before I get too far deep into this rabbit hole, there is a trend that I noticed when I started to do my research for this. So when I picked this topic, I started to tell people in my life about this project that I have taken up for myself, and I would simply tell them my topic and like pose the question, and 99% of the time I received the same exact answer, which was, what is femicide? And at first I had no intention behind asking this question to others. Like, I was simply telling my friends or my peers about this project and a topic, and realized the trend and responses from them. So once I picked up on it, that is when it was almost like a mini experiment for me. And not one where I was like critical over the lack of understanding from the so-called subject, but one where I would simply just take mental notes of people's understanding or lack of the question. And it was fascinating. Almost every single person I talked to did not even know what femicide was. First, I would have to define the term for them, and once they understood the meaning of it, they either discussed their understanding of it with me, or they like began to ask questions about it. So I would define it for them, and it would either be like, oh yeah, that's what that is. Okay, right, let's talk about it. Or they would once again be like, what is femicide? I didn't know women were directly targeted. So yeah, something else I noticed was the amount of people who didn't know what femicide was. And with that being said, I truthfully do not think this has anything to do with ignorance. I think these people are not choosing to turn a blind eye. They were actually just unaware of the issue of femicide. And with that being said, I made sure I diversified my crowd too. I would talk to people of all different political backgrounds and beliefs, and all of them shared this similar misinformation or even lack of when it came to the topic. And another thing that I noticed when I would talk to people was people's attitudes towards the subject. So this was really interesting. Most people, once I explained to them what femicide was, immediately thought of serial killers. Their first thought went to the infamous serial killers like Ted Bundy, and only thought of brutal, cold-blooded serial killers from the past. And it was almost like they created a character, like in their minds, of someone who they knew existed, but it was far from reality, or a type of killer that was like once in a blue moon, which very few people understood how severe femicide is and just how frequently it occurs. So that also posed the question of why is this? Why is femicide such a big issue that is rarely talked about or even known about by so many people? And in my opinion, a lot of this has to do with a very Western privileged worldview that, like, I am even guilty of obtaining. In America, it only makes sense that we would only apply this topic to our own population and apply it to, this serial killer with some sort of strange fetish, rather than recognizing the reality of this, not just in our country, but in other countries. And I want to emphasize again that I have fallen victim to this. I'm not saying that I'm super, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I don't want anyone to feel guilty for not being aware of the situation, because I really do think that we can't point fingers and place blame for this not being talked about. I do think, however, this all circles back to the topic of why it is so important for femicide to be in its own category. I think if femicide were something that was set apart, I think the gravity of the situation and conversations would arise. And so, like, for myself personally, when I began doing research for this topic, I was honestly sick at how much I was unaware of. When simply typing in femicide into Google or whatever search engine you prefer, the vast majority of content and images somehow related back to Latin America. And the issue of femicide in these nations is absolutely sickening. There's really no other way to describe it other than sickening, and I don't understand how it is not something so heavily discussed. And one of the places that I really want to mention is Honduras. So the reality of being a woman in Honduras is absolutely horrendous, and something that I learned is that and one woman is murdered every 16 hours. So let that number sink in. One every 16 hours. And the reality is that in places like Honduras, the murder of women happens so frequently that it becomes quote unquote normal. And women are murdered simply because they're women. They do not receive justice because they're women. And this cycle just continues over and over again. And so, okay, I know that my project is not over the question of what is femicide. I know I can't sit here and explain what femicide is over and over again, and I won't continue to go through all of the information and statistics that I found because that could be a whole another 20 minutes of me talking about it on its own. So, to stick to the initial question, should femicide be its own separate category of crime and why? I I won't continue to talk about the horrors of femicide and why I'm so passionate about it, because that is not the question, but I will recap the question in short. I believe femicide should be its own separate category of crime because I firmly believe that it will raise awareness to the issue. I think that tends to be the case when something is set apart, people start to take notice of it. If this were to be set apart, people would take notice of it, people would ask questions. And I think just because femicide isn't something that we see day to day walking down the street, which we should consider ourselves lucky for, because that is clearly not the case in other countries, that doesn't mean that it is not relevant and applicable to us. And femicide is even more common in America than we think. It is not just something that happens in other countries, and it's something that we do not discuss enough. And I think for femicide to be its own category of crime is the first step towards raising awareness to the issue that is already blatantly at hand. I just think it is important for gender-based violence to be widely recognized as a severe issue, and this femicide is the most extreme version of it. And overall, I'll wrap it up. Overall, I think for the women who live in fear of being murdered of their gender with no justice to be served, I think it is only our duty to call femicide what it is and create an individual title, crime, and sentencing that is set apart in order to spread awareness of the issue. Not only spread awareness, but retaliate towards the crime and continue the pursuit of justice and equality for all women globally. That's all I got for today. I could make this so much longer, but I'm going to keep it short. Thank you for listening. I hope you gained something out of it, whether it be food for thought or something you never heard before. And I hope that this only continues the conversation further. So thank you for listening. I will be done now. Thank you.